So the General Convention, this is the kind of basic structure. It's an event that happens every 3 years. The presiding officers are the presiding bishop and the president of the House of Deputies. And then there's an executive council and there are other sorts of interim bodies. The basic structure of General Convention, though, are the House of Bishops and the House of Deputies. If you thought about England, it would be a little bit like the House of Lords and the House of Commons, or the Senate and the House of Representatives. The House of Bishops are all the bishops, both those who are currently functioning and those who have retired. House of Deputies is an evenly mixed group of other clergy, that is, priests and deacons and lay people, an equal number of clergy and lay. All right. At the next level, we've got diocesan convention, which is analogous to General Convention. The bishop, who is the CEO of the diocese and the chief pastor, and he's assisted by the chancellor, who is in the work of the convention, functions as our parliamentarian, among other things. There's a secretary to the convention, the canon to the ordinary, Anna Carmichael, and then there are these two continuing groups, the diocesan council and the standing committee, that, you know, the convention only meets once a year for a couple of days. These two committees have an ongoing life in the life of the diocese. The diocesan council principally is involved in the business side of the council. Budgets, other kinds of sort of like real estate decisions, things like that. The standing committee, on the other hand, is a council of advice to the bishop. It's the standing committee that is asked to approve the ordinations of other bishops. That happens all across the country when a new bishop's being elected. And if there is no bishop, it's the standing committee that is the substitute, really, for the bishop's authority. Okay, was that clear? Because the standing committee has a very interesting kind of distinct role in the diocese. And I mean, both of these are very significant groups. And so when Father Peter was talking about the approval for the opening up process regarding COVID-19, both of these groups had their say in terms of that document and those steps. Okay, and then at the next level down, the local level, again, the parishes, missions, institutions. Any questions about the General Convention or the diocese, what you see there? You see how they're sort of parallel to each other in structure?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then at the parish level, this is the level that you're most experienced in. You know, we have an annual parish meeting where folks get elected. We have a rector, Father Peter, who is the pastor, the CEO, is responsible for liturgy and education, music, all those kinds of things. And then the vestry that is responsible for the kind of the fiscal and physical aspect of the life of the church. And Ken, you're our junior warden. You want to say anything about life in the vestry?
It's a lot of work. No, it's been really interesting. Of course, this year turned out to be a lot different than it started out to be. So, but it's an interesting process, and I would recommend it to everybody.
Great. Well, and as the junior warden, you really have a lot of interesting things and challenges, like, you know, when the sprinklers are flooding the front of the church and things like that.
And the alarm goes off in the church, and Yeah, there's all kinds of things. Plugged toilets, plugged drain lines, removing and adding things, putting chairs and tables up and down, and just a variety of stuff. That
Lighting.
Yeah, and lighting too.
That was a major
That was
thing.
the very first challenge I had, was fixing that overhead lighting in the church. So
you're making this job sound pretty attractive.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, the vestry, and we'll talk more about this next week when we'll really be looking particularly at life here at St. John's. But, you can see that the vestry has, an analogous responsibility for the life of the parish as the diocesan council does for the diocese and the general convention does for the denomination as a whole. Okay. So there are parishes and there are missions. St. John's in Lodi is a parish. St. John's in Stockton is a mission. So what's different? Oh.
Sorry, I dropped out and I'm just coming back.
Oh.
On a different computer. I don't know. Suddenly I couldn't get in anymore on the one we have. So sorry for the interruption.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
Okay, so in terms of governance and finances between missions and parishes. So in a mission, the bishop has role in selecting the leadership of what would be the bishop's committee. The bishop appoints the clergy to the church, and the bishop has more authority over financial matters in the mission. Okay. In parishes, the parish selects its lay leaders and elects clergy, like Father Peter for St. John's, subject to the consent and input of the bishop, and has more financial independence in terms of the decisions it makes about its use of property and things like that. Any question about that? And one of the things, for example, St. Paul's in Modesto went through quite a lengthy process to move from being a mission to being a parish, all right? And they had to prove that they could financially support themselves and pay for their clergy independent of the diocese, and also pay the diocesan assessment that each parish has to pay. All right. Penny, do you want to say anything more about that process?
Well, it was long and arduous, but they finally made it, and so now they are a parish as of this year. Yeah.
Yep.
Why did they do that?
They wanted to have more control over financial matters, for one thing. They felt they had a stronger voice as a parish instead of a mission, but they do own some property adjacent to the church, and they wanted to be able to make their own decisions about what to do with it and have the money from any sale or renting of the property go to them and not go to the diocese.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other question about that? Okay. So participation in the councils of the church. So this is a look at the catechism. If you were in the conversation about the Book of Common Prayer, we kind of alluded to the catechism. It's an important piece of church teaching that's found in the Book of Common Prayer. And as you know, it's done in a series of questions and answers. And on page 855, it says, who are the ministers of the church? And the answer to that, and it's important to note the order, right? Before the ordained clergy, lay people are first in that order. So the ministers of the church are the lay persons, bishops, priests, and deacons. The next question, what is the ministry of the laity? The ministry of the laypersons is to represent Christ and his church, to bear witness to him, and according to the gifts given them, to carry Christ's work of reconciliation in the world, and to take their place in the life, worship, and this is the important part for our conversation, the governance of the church. Okay, so that role of lay people in the decision-making of the church at every level is fundamental to who we are as a denomination. So clergy, of course, are also included in this, and this is in the ordination service. And this is actually the ordination of a priest. It says you're called to work as pastor, priest, and teacher, together with your bishop and fellow presbyters, and to take your share in the council of the church, all right, to participate in the decision-making. All right, so clergy have a role as well, not just the bishop. Okay, so now the rules. What are the rules? Where are they? What rules are we talking about? So there's certain documents that kind of define who we are. First is the Constitution and the canons of the Episcopal Church. And these are really riveting documents that, you know, when you're tired and you want to go to sleep at night and you can't, 5 minutes of reading this and you'll be gone, I promise you. And you can access all of those documents on the Episcopal Church website. We walked through a little bit of that last time, but if you go into the search function, if you don't remember, I mean, I showed you where it is, but if you don't remember where that is, just go in the search function and write Constitution and Canons of the Episcopal Church, and it'll be right there. And as it suggests, the Constitution, just like the Constitution of the United States, it lays out in very broad strokes how this enterprise, the Episcopal Church, is to be organized. The canons are really the laws, all right? So it's a much longer series of documents, very detailed, but lines out everything you ever wanted to know, and mostly what you probably never wanted to know about the Episcopal Church. The next important thing is the Book of Common Prayer. And that includes, you know, not just the rituals that are in there, but also those historical documents, the catechism and other things. Then the resolutions of General Convention. So each year, or every 3 years rather, when General Convention meets, in addition to considering possible emendations to the canons of the church, there will come forward a series of resolutions on all kinds of things. There could be resolutions on, Israel and Palestine. There could be resolutions about Black Lives Matter. There could be resolutions about what to do about you know, doing same-sex marriages, all right? All those kinds of questions come before General Convention, and they have a very carefully constructed process for addressing those. And the resolutions that are passed, those are also available on the website of the Episcopal Church. Then there's a manual for how business is done in the church affairs. There's the Constitution and Canons of the diocese. So that is analogous to the national one. Each diocese has their own constitution and canons, and then each parish has its own bylaws. And all of these institutions follow Robert's Rules of Order. So there's a certain regularity to how things are introduced. They have to be seconded, you know, questions brought to a vote, all of that kind of stuff. Any question about that?
Tom, I would just like to add that because it's important as people hear this about the laws and the rules, how we still flow as a national church into a diocesan church, into a parish church. And one of those rules that's written within all of these is that the national canons, as they're called, or rules, are established. You have diocesan canons, and they cannot go against national
Correct.
canons. And
Right.
parish canons fall under that, and our parish laws, or parish bylaws, as we would call them, cannot go against diocesan laws or national church laws. So we still all remain connected that way.
Mhm. Yep. No, that's great. Thank you. Yeah. And that sort of goes with this Episcopal, sort of hierarchical structure, right? That we all function within these series of levels of authority and ways of operating that have to be consistent with one another.
Is there something in the structure akin to the Supreme Court?
Well, there are judicial processes for sure, particularly when there is an infraction, and especially when a bishop is involved in an infraction. I don't believe that there is a sort of freestanding judicial enterprise. I think it sort of is convened when it's necessary. Is that your understanding, Peter?
Yes, Tom, that's my understanding. And again, I think if I'm reading between the lines, Ken, and what you're asking, like if there is some issue in the church, that's probably something that would be discussed at the convention levels, and let convention figure that out, and then push it up to general convention if there needs to be more discussion and more clarification on something. And then when there are infractions, if a clergy person was thought to be embezzling, that clergy person would go through. There's a legal church process that the clergy person goes through, as well as, I guess, if the clergy person was doing an infraction like embezzlement, that's also a federal crime. So you'd also go through the U.S. court system. So there are systems for those kind of checks and balances, and to ensure proper behaviors of individuals.
Okay.
So who makes the rules, right? So the General Convention makes the rules about the constitutions and canons of the Episcopal Church. That's where those decisions get made. And if those constitutions or canons were amended, they would happen at General Convention. The Book of Common Prayer is amended, changed, or replaced by the General Convention. And clearly this does not happen often or lightly. The last time was in 1979. And then, as we talked about a little bit earlier, it's the resolutions of the General Convention, which are more kind of short-term things, usually reacting to something that's happening kind of in the historical moment of the church. Who makes the rules for the diocese? Beyond the rules that arise from the General Convention, the Diocesan Convention makes its own constitution and canons. But as Father Peter was saying earlier, the constitution and canons and the resolutions of the convention must be consistent with the constitution and canons of the Episcopal Church. We're not congregational. We can't make our own decisions. It has to be consistent with the larger body, okay? And then congregations have parish bylaws, and those must be consistent with the constitution and canons of the Episcopal Church and with the constitutions and canons of the diocese. All right, so it's in some ways it's like, those, they're Russian dolls, one was in another, when another, they all have to be kind of singing the same tune in some ways. Does that make sense?
I think the parish bylaws in our diocese are left to the diocese to write. We're still waiting for the diocese to come up with some bylaws that we can all use, right?
That is correct. That, I think, is the next slide.
Ah,
No, but it's coming. It's coming.
Okay.
We'll come
All
to
right.
that. So who has to follow them, right? We all have to follow these rules, right? In accordance with the Constitution and canons of the Church and the diocese, anybody that's has an office in the church has to follow those. We're all obligated, all right? And this is sort of the swearing fealty, really, to the bishop and to the Episcopal Church. Each clergy has to say these lines. I did when I was ordained back in November, and I love the last line. It's highlighted here in yellow. The phrasing of it. So I tried to memorize all my responses during the ordination, and the hardest part for me to memorize was this line, because I found this language very strange. I do solemnly engage to conform to the doctrine, discipline, and worship of the Episcopal Church. It was that do solemnly engage to conform that I couldn't quite wrap my head around. But it's a commitment. You're signing on to behave and to teach and to engage in ministry consistent with the doctrine and discipline and worship of the Episcopal Church.
And Tom, if I can interject,
Yeah.
and maybe you have a slide on this, so forgive me, but I once had to explain to a vestry this because the church I was at was acting more as a congregational church, and I really had to explain all this. And because I bring up vestry because vestry also adheres to this.
Yes.
Vestry are supposed to sign a document, I believe it's in this diocese as well, that they will conform to the doctrine, discipline, and worship of the Episcopal Church. And if asked, it can simply be stated, the doctrine is our Bible, and the discipline are the Constitution and canons that you've referred to, and the worship is our Book of Common Prayer. These are the three kind of important books that represent who we are as Episcopalians.
Absolutely. Thank you. Why do we have rules? To define roles and responsibilities of leaders and members, to run the business of the church, to promote stewardship, to protect the vulnerable, and to ensure the continuity and furtherance of mission and ministry. Rules have a place. And so one of the things about the Episcopal tradition is, in a certain sense, we are a conservative church, that we have respect for rules and see the value in structure, all right? And it gives us a certain sort of affinity with other churches who share that point of view. So why are the rules relevant in this diocese? So the split, we won't go into detail about that, but some of you have vivid memories of all that, was in part facilitated by the removal of experienced leaders and by, in fact, thwarting many of the rules in the church that prevent bad things from happening. There was an intentional lack of educative process. There was a marginalization of parishes and clergy. And it was the rules that ultimately preserved this diocese so that we can be still the Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin. Those of you who might have lived through that, you want to say anything about that? Okay. So just to say, that Michael Glass came to work for this diocese as a part of the Remain Episcopal effort that arose after the church happened. So this slide is really important to him because, you know, it was his efforts that really, following the rules, helped to make sure this diocese survived. So where are the rules? The governance documents, the constitutions and canons, the Episcopal Church, the website is there for that. And if you like, I could send you all this slide so you can more easily locate them. The Book of Common Prayer, you know, the resolutions for General Convention are available here. All these links are also available through the Episcopal Church's website. There's governance documents. If you really want to read the Manual of Business Methods in Church Affairs, it's on the Episcopal Church's website. Good luck with that. And then the constitutions and the canons for the diocese is available there. And parish bylaws.
Oh my God.
I like that line. Resources for navigating the rules. Here are all the people that can help you. The Chancellor, the Bishop's Office, Vestry Papers, which is a regular kind of a periodical and unperiodical. Henny's a regular reader of those. I don't know, Ken, whether you look at that, but those are really very helpful. And, you know, ongoing diocesan educational events as well. And this goes to the comment Henny made a few minutes ago. The diocesan constitution and canons are currently under review. And similarly with parish governing documents. So that's, you know, an ongoing process that seems to have taken much longer than anybody expected it to, but that seems to be often the case with things, particularly in these days. So coming to the vestry will be some instructions for about how to reframe the parish governing documents at some future date. Any questions about any of that? Henny, do you want to say anything more about your comment?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, St. Paul's has been trying to get the bylaws for a while, and I guess they had their own bylaws, but they were kind of outdated, and they wanted to update them themselves, but they've been told, no, don't do it. It's being done at the diocesan level. And that's been going on for quite a while now. So.
Yeah, and the desire is to have sort of a template that all the parishes would use, so it would be consistent. Not that it couldn't be tailored to specific concerns of each parish, but that there would be some coherence and consistency from one parish to another.
Right.
So the Chancellor's office, Michael Glass's office, this is what he does. He supports the diocese forming governance documents like we were just talking about. He knows more than he ever wanted to know about property transactions in the diocese, because of course he's been the principal person responsible for pursuing all the court cases to get back the property from the diocese that tried to split away. And he supports the diocese in navigating all its secular legal matters. Okay, so that's the conclusion of that. Are there any questions?
I have a question about, and I dropped off for a while, so you might have been covering this while I was madly trying to get back on, but did you talk about the standing committee and the diocesan committee at all?
I did, yeah, a little bit.
Okay, well then I'll check with you later on those, because I don't get them clear in my mind who's on what and which jobs they have. Yeah, okay.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep. Any other questions, comments? Peter, any thoughts from you?
No, unless there were questions, I think this was a really good overview of everything. It's a lot in one session, but it's the most concise way you presented it in a very
One question I was going to ask you, Peter. So having come from the Diocese of Virginia to the Diocese of San Joaquin, what do you notice that's different between the two dioceses? Anything strike you?
Not that I can think of. Size is really the only thing, but the way we do things, the way we engage in the conversations, the way we vote, it's all the same. I think the only difference I'm thinking of that's bubbling up was how I was hired. The way I've experienced it in dioceses before is when somebody puts their way through for a job is your resume goes across a bishop's desk and a bishop gives some kind of perfunctory approval for those resumes and then sends them to a search committee who then decides. And then when the search committee picks their person, they go back to the bishop and say, this is who we would like. And the bishop affirms that. In this diocese, it was backwards. The bishop actually, and the canon of the ordinary, did Zoom interviews with us candidates right off the bat. So the first person I interviewed was with the bishop. And that's never happened to me before in all my stages of in the Episcopal Church. So, but that's probably an example of a diocesan rule that doesn't go against the national canons, but that they've modified that for their purposes here. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, in part it was because this is kind of a resurrection diocese. I think there's a much greater sense that the bishop wants to make sure that the candidates are people that he feels are going to be really going to strengthen this diocese that's still sort of recovering from things. I mean, I thought it was interesting, you came from one of the oldest dioceses in the country, and some of the oldest Episcopal churches in the United States are in the Diocese of Virginia, to this, West Coast upstart, sort of kind of diocese. So I'm just curious if there was much difference there.
Yeah, and there are a huge difference is, and I told you about how I had to talk to my vestry about it, this feeling of separation from the diocese. It's actually the oldest Episcopal diocese, but they want to act like they're congregational churches where every church is its own entity. And somehow, and I'm not sure how this is done or why it wasn't voted in, but they don't do assessments. And for those who don't know is, again, Tom did such a great way of showing kind of the Russian dolls and how it's from the top down. What happens in the life of the parish and how we operate is also how the diocese operates. So we ask parishioners, in order for St. John's to survive, we ask parishioners to pledge and give money. Well, we as a parish, as a body, we pledge to the diocese and we give money to the diocese so that they can function. And the diocese then pledges, I think, to the national church so that they can function. So we do it in that way. In Virginia, there were no assessments and it was sort of voluntary. They got to a point while I was there where they wanted everybody to give 10% of their annual budget. And, but there was no enforcement here. And in the Diocese of Los Angeles, from where I'm from, there's no question. It's just in the rules that that's what you do. The diocese looks at your worth and assesses you every year, and you pay that assessment. And certainly a smoother way.
That's interesting. Part of that could be the history in Virginia, because Virginia, back around the time of the American Revolution, they weren't interested in having a bishop. There was no bishop in the colonies at all. And it was more the northern, around New York and New Jersey and New England, they were interested in having a bishop. The parishes in Virginia weren't interested in having a bishop at all. They were supported by their local vestries, who were property families, and they didn't see the need. And I mean, they were congregational then too. Okay, any other questions, comments? Because we're almost at the end here. Okay, so next time we're going to focus on St. John's, and I've recruited a couple of people to help talk about St. John's. Pat Failing will be with us in person, and Karen Olds will be doing a little video to talk about what it means to be the senior warden. And before we go, I was curious if you had any questions for Karen you'd like her to talk about in terms of the vestry or what it means to be your senior warden, something you always wanted to know about the senior warden.
Maybe people can write them in if something occurs later.
That would be great. Yes, if you could, something comes to you, send me an email. I'll pass that along to Karen, and we'll have that tape, and we'll be looking at the demographics, the history, the present work and ministry of the church, and think a little bit about what future ministry possibilities might be. So thank you again so much for your participation, your questions.